The call came in just after 0200 hours, a frantic encoded burst of static over the tactical net that turned the already tense atmosphere in the Joint Operations Center into something far more desperate. A squad of Army Rangers on a high-value target mission in the Shoraback Valley had been compromised. Their exfiltration route, a narrow, winding pass through the mountains, had been collapsed by an avalanche triggered by enemy mortars. They were pinned down in a shallow depression, a natural cul-de-sac, with jagged rock walls on 3 sides and a well-fortified enemy position dug into the high ground overlooking the only way out. They were, in the blunt assessment of the operations officer, sitting in a fishbowl. Lieutenant Commander Miller, the leader of the SEAL team on standby, studied the satellite imagery on the large plasma screen. His team was the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force. They were the best chance the Rangers had. The terrain was brutal, a vertical maze of scree and granite, and the extraction would be a nightmare under fire. He was already mentally running the insertion points, the LZ options, the potential sniper overwatch positions. His eyes scanned the topographical data, looking for a God's eye, a place where one of his men could see the entire bowl and silence the enemy guns pinning the Rangers down. His gaze settled on a peak, designated grid reference Papa 3-1. It was a nightmare, a sheer 1,000-foot vertical cliff face leading to a razorback ridge that was exposed to the wind for a click before you even got to the actual vantage point. It was over 2 miles from the trapped unit, a distance that was, for all practical purposes, outside the effective range of any standard-issue sniper system. The math was simple. The bullet drop would be measured in dozens of feet, the wind drift would be unpredictable, and the Coriolis effect, the very rotation of the Earth, would have to be accounted for. It was a shot no one in his right mind would even attempt. It was a physicist's equation, not a soldier's order. "That's the only spot that gives us a full view of the enemy's support by fire position," Miller muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thorne, the team's lead sniper, shook his head. "Sir, from there the round is in the air for over 4 seconds. The wind alone. It's a lottery ticket. We need to get closer. We need to get on the valley floor with them." "Can't," the operations officer cut in. "The pass is down. Any ground movement into that valley will be seen and heard an hour before you get there. They'll just turn their guns on you. It has to be silent, and it has to be from up high." Thorne and the other 2 SEALs in the room, Petty Officers First Class Hayes and Kincaid, exchanged a look. They were the best. They'd made impossible shots before. But this wasn't just impossible. It was outside the realm of credible physics. The wind speed at that altitude was a constant, howling gale. The air density would change the bullet's trajectory in ways that were nearly impossible to calculate on the fly. It was then that the door to the OPC opened, and Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Jensen walked in. She was a Marine Scout sniper, currently on a liaison and training assignment with the Joint Special Operations Command. She was shorter than the SEALs, lean and compact, with the kind of stillness about her that wasn't born from calm, but from an immense, coiled discipline. She carried a hard case, its contents known to everyone in the room. Inside was her personal weapon, an M100 7.50 caliber rifle, a beast of a gun designed to punch through engine blocks and concrete barriers at distance. She was the only one in the entire theater who had successfully made a kill shot at over 2,200 meters. Miller briefed her without hesitation. He knew her file. He knew her reputation. He showed her Papa 3-1 on the screen. Jensen studied it for a full minute, her face unreadable. She traced the contour lines with her finger, calculating the angle, the distance, the exposure of the ridge she would have to cross. She looked at the atmospheric data scrolling on the side of the screen. "I can do it," she said. Her voice was quiet, matter-of-fact. Thorne let out a short, humorless laugh. "With all due respect, Gunny, that's not a shot. That's a prayer. The ballistic coefficient of a round at that range, the wind shear, you'd have a better chance throwing the damn rifle at them." "The wind is the only variable," Jensen replied, her eyes still fixed on the screen. The drop is math. The spin drift is math. The Coriolis effect is math. I have a Kestrel 4500 that gives me real-time data. I can build a firing solution on the mountain. Building it and executing it are two different things, Kincaid added, his tone less mocking but equally dismissive. That's not a hide, it's a cliff face. You'd have to be Spider-Man to even get into position. I climb, Jensen said simply. The tension in the room was palpable. The clock was ticking. The Rangers' last transmission had been frantic, reporting 2 wounded, ammunition running low, and the enemy beginning to probe their perimeter. There was no time for debate, but there was also a deep-seated, unspoken resistance. It wasn't just about the shot. It was about who was offering to take it. In the hyper-masculine, insular world of Tier 1 operators, she was an outsider. Worse, she was a woman. To rely on her, to let her attempt a shot that none of them would even try, was an affront to their pride. "Sir, we need to find another way," Thorne insisted, turning his back on Jensen. "We need to get a team on the valley floor. I'll lead it myself." "You'll be dead before you get within 500 meters of them," Miller shot back. "The op order is clear. We need overwatch from Papa 3-1. He looked past Thorne directly at Jensen. "Gunny, how long to get into position?" She checked her watch. "The helo can drop me at the base of the eastern face. From there, 3 hours to the top of the ridge, another 45 minutes to the firing point. First light is in 4 hours. I can be in place and ready by 0620. "And the shot?" Miller pressed. Jensen finally turned from the screen and met his gaze. There was no arrogance in her eyes, no bravado. There was only the cold, hard certainty of a professional who knew her craft. "If I have a clear line of sight and the data holds, I will make the shot." Miller gave a curt nod. "Get your gear. You're on the bird in 10. As she left to prepare, Hayes shook his head. "This is a mistake, sir. We're sending her out on a suicide mission. She's not going to make that shot. And when she doesn't, we'll have wasted 3 hours and be right back where we started." "Maybe," Miller said, his voice heavy. "But she's the only one with the balls to even try. Now let's get to work on a contingency. If she fails, we're going in the hard way." The CH-47 Chinook cut through the frigid pre-dawn air like a ghost, its rotors a muffled thump, thump, thump against the howling wind. Inside, Sarah Jensen sat alone on a canvas jump seat, her world reduced to the familiar weight of her gear and the rhythmic vibration of the aircraft. Her M107 was secured in its case by her feet, a cold, silent promise. Across from her, the 3 SEALs from the OPC sat in a tight cluster, their body language a clear, if unspoken, wall of exclusion. Thorne was checking his weapon with aggressive, sharp movements. Hayes stared blankly at the bulkhead. Kincaid looked at her once, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before turning away. They weren't her team. They never would be. She was an attachment, a specialist to be used and discarded. Their distrust was a physical force in the dimly lit cabin, heavier than the gear on her back. She didn't take it personally. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. All that mattered was the shot. The ramp of the Chinook cracked open, and a blast of -20-degree air filled the cabin. The pilot's voice crackled in their headsets. 2 minutes to LZ. Winds at the drop point are gusting to 40 knots. Good luck. The helo hovered a few feet above a rocky plateau at the base of the eastern face of Papa 3-1. Jensen didn't wait for a signal. She grabbed her rifle case and her pack and moved toward the ramp. As she passed Thorne, she paused for a fraction of a second. "Stay off the net unless it's an emergency," she said, her voice calm in their shared comms. "I'll need silence to work." Thorne just stared at her, his jaw tight. She didn't wait for a reply. She jumped. The impact jarred her spine, but she was already moving, ducking low beneath the rotor wash as the Chinook lifted away, swallowed instantly by the darkness and the snow. She was alone. The climb was a brutal vertical chess match against the mountain. The eastern face was a sheer wall of frozen, brittle rock. She moved with a methodical, spider-like grace that belied the 70 pounds of gear on her back. Her fingers, even in thick tactical gloves, were numb within the first 10 minutes. The wind tore at her, trying to pry her from the handholds she found in the merest cracks and fissures. She didn't think about the cold. She didn't think about the 1,500-foot drop below her. She didn't think about the SEAL's dismissive looks. She thought only in terms of movement. Left foot, find a hold. Right hand, pull up, breathe. It was a meditative state she had cultivated over years of training, a way to quiet the mind and let the body do what it was conditioned to do. An hour into the climb, she reached a small, wind-scoured ledge barely 3 feet wide. It was her first chance to rest. She pulled out her Kestrel 4500, a handheld weather meter, and took another reading. The wind speed had increased. The temperature had dropped further. She ran the numbers through her ballistic solver on her PDA, cross-referencing it with the map data. The solution it gave her was terrifying. To hit a target at 3,247 meters, she would have to elevate her scope to an angle that seemed cartoonish. The bullet, upon leaving the barrel, would arc nearly 400 feet into the air before beginning its long, lazy descent. The time of flight would be just over 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, a gust of wind could push the round 10 feet off target. The rotation of the Earth would spin the target area nearly a foot out from under her point of aim. She memorized the data, stowed the PDA, and began climbing again. Meanwhile, at the FOB, Thorne, Hayes, and Kincaid were hunched over a comms unit, listening to the desperate traffic from the trapped Rangers. The enemy was getting bolder. They had moved a heavy machine gun team to a new position that was now raking the Rangers' depression with devastating, enfilading fire. One of the Rangers had been hit in the leg. The bleeding was bad. They needed that gun silenced. "Where is she?" Thorne muttered, checking his watch. "She's been on that rock for 2.5 hours. She should be at the ridge by now." As if in answer, Jensen's voice came over the tactical net, quiet and slightly breathless from the exertion. "Jensen to base. I'm at the ridge line. Moving to the firing point. ETA 20 mics." "Copy, Gunny," Miller responded from the OPC. "Be advised, the situation on the ground has deteriorated. The Rangers are taking heavy fire from a new position. Grid follows." He read out the coordinates. On the ridge, Jensen lay flat, crawling on her belly through the razor-sharp rocks and ice. The wind here was a constant, deafening roar. It whipped snow and debris into her face, forcing her to squint. She inched forward, dragging her heavy rifle case behind her until she reached the edge of a small, shallow depression that offered a sliver of protection from the relentless gale. This was it, the firing point. She set up the rifle, its massive bipod digging into the frozen ground. She opened her data book, a waterproof notebook filled with handwritten ballistic tables and atmospheric data. She took another reading with the Kestrel. The wind was gusting from the southwest at 28 knots, with a steady crosswind component of 15 knots from left to right. The air density was thin, the barometric pressure low. She dialed the adjustments into her scope, the clicks of the turrets sounding unnaturally loud in the howling wind. She adjusted the angle of her custom-made adjustable cheek rest, ensuring a perfect, repeatable cheek weld. She peered through the scope. The world swam into focus. The valley floor was a chaotic mess of shadows and dim pre-dawn light. She could just make out the Ranger's position, a dark smudge against the snow. But the enemy machine gun nest Miller had mentioned was perfectly placed, tucked behind a low stone wall, its barrel spitting angry orange flames. It was a nightmare shot. The crosswind was brutal. The range was almost incomprehensible. She settled in, her body becoming one with the rifle. She controlled her breathing, her heart rate slowing to a meditative rhythm. She tracked the wind by watching the snow streaming off a distant peak, noting the shifts and eddies. She waited. The sun began to crest the mountains behind her, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful, terrible dawn. The light would soon fill the valley, making the Rangers even more exposed. It was now or never. The sun had fully cleared the peaks, and the valley below was bathed in the harsh, revealing light of a new day. For the Rangers pinned in the cul-de-sac, this light was a death sentence. It erased the shadows they had been hiding in, making every movement a target for the enemy gunners above. The chatter on the SEAL's comms unit at the FOB had become a litany of desperation. The Ranger squad leader's voice was strained, a thin veneer of professionalism cracking under the immense pressure. "We have 3 wounded. I repeat, 3 wounded. The machine gun on the North Ridge is tearing us apart. We can't lift our heads. If we don't get relief in the next few minutes, we're going to have to make a break for it. It's our only option." Thorne slammed his fist on the metal table. "She's had 20 minutes. What the hell is she doing up there? She's frozen. She's missed her window." He grabbed his helmet. "Sir, I'm taking my team. We'll go in on the deck. We can still get there." "Stand down, Chief." Miller's voice came through the speaker, hard as iron. "You move now, you compromise her. You give her position away. You wait." On the Razorback Ridge, Sarah Jensen was not frozen, and she had not missed her window. She was simply waiting for the one thing her calculations couldn't provide, a moment of stillness. The wind was her enemy, a chaotic, unpredictable force that made a mockery of her precise math. She watched it through her scope, seeing it in the dance of the snow, in the rippling of a distant tattered flag on an enemy position. It would gust hard for 30 seconds, then die down to a deceptive calm for 10, only to shift direction entirely for another 20. It was a pattern without a pattern. She lay there barely breathing, her eye pressed to the rubber eyepiece of the scope. The crosshairs danced over the enemy machine gun position. She could see the gunner, a man in a dirty wool coat, feeding a belt of ammunition into the weapon. She could see his assistant beside him, scanning the valley with binoculars. They were confident, exposed, believing themselves to be beyond the reach of any threat. Jensen's spotter, a role she had to fill herself today, was the data in her head and the feel of the wind on her cheek. She was a single, self-contained system of death. Then it happened. A lull. Not a full stop, but a significant drop in the wind speed. The snow streaming off the distant peak lessened. The crosswind component, according to her internal calculation, dropped to a manageable 5 knots. It was the window. It was a sliver of a second in the grand scheme of things, but in her world, it was an eternity. She took one final deep breath, then let half of it out. Her finger rested on the trigger of the M107, feeling the minute take-up of the 2-stage trigger. She made a final microscopic adjustment to her point of aim, holding the crosshairs high and to the right of the machine gunner, accounting for the massive bullet drop and the remaining crosswind. She was aiming at empty air. The .50 caliber round, a heavy slab of brass and copper, rested in the chamber. She had personally loaded it, checked the primer, ensured it was seated perfectly. It was the only round she would get. A miss would give away her position, and the enemy would simply move their gun. The Rangers would be lost. She squeezed the trigger. The report of the M107 was deafening, a thunderclap swallowed instantly by the howling wind. The massive rifle bucked against her shoulder, the muzzle blast kicking up a cloud of snow and dust. But Jensen didn't flinch. Her eye never left the scope. She was already tracking, following the imaginary line of the bullet's flight. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The machine gun continued to fire. The Rangers were still pinned. The world held its breath. Then, 4 seconds after the trigger break, the bullet arrived. Through her scope, Jensen saw it. It wasn't a clean Hollywood headshot. It was far more brutal, far more final. The heavy .50 caliber round, still carrying immense kinetic energy after its 2-mile journey, didn't just hit the machine gunner. It obliterated him. It struck him square in the chest, and the effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The gunner simply vanished from her sight, replaced by a sudden, shocking red mist that painted the rocks behind him. The assistant gunner, sitting next to him, was hurled backward by the sheer overpressure and the impact of the bullet passing through the gunner's body and striking the weapon itself, sending pieces of metal and stone flying in all directions. The machine gun fell silent. The angry orange flame that had been tormenting the Rangers winked out of existence. On the valley floor, the Ranger squad leader heard the silence before he understood it. The devastating fire that had kept them pinned had simply stopped. He risked a glance over the rock he was hiding behind. The enemy position was a chaos of dust and motion. Men were shouting, scrambling away from the shattered gun nest. A second later, Jensen's calm, quiet voice came over the tactical net. "Target down! Machine gun is out. I have eyes on secondary targets. Stand by." Back at the FOB, the OPC erupted. The operations officer let out a whoop that was completely out of character. The radio operator just stared at his console, mouth agape. But in the corner, Thorne, Hayes, and Kincaid were silent. They had heard the shot. They had heard the calm report. They had seen the range data. They had heard the impossible become reality. Thorne's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. The professional in him was awestruck. The shot was, by any metric, one of the most incredible feats of marksmanship in the history of modern warfare. It was a shot that would be studied, analyzed, and talked about for decades. But the man in him, the one who had dismissed her, who had let his pride and prejudice cloud his judgment, was left with a bitter, hollow feeling. He had been wrong, monumentally, unforgivably wrong. On the ridge, Jensen had no time for reflection. She cycled the bolt on her rifle, ejecting the spent casing and chambering another round. The enemy was in disarray, their confidence shattered. They were moving, exposing themselves, trying to find cover from an invisible death from the sky. She began to work, her shots methodical and precise. A man carrying an RPG launcher tried to run for a new position. Jensen tracked him, led him just a touch, and fired. He crumpled. An officer appeared, shouting orders, pointing towards the ridge. Jensen found him in her scope. Another shot. He was gone. For the next 10 minutes, she was the angel of death, her presence felt but never seen. Each time the enemy tried to regroup, tried to mount a counterattack on the Rangers, a .50 caliber round from the heavens would find them. The battle turned. The hunters became the hunted. With the enemy's support by fire position neutralized and their command structure in chaos, the pressure on the Rangers evaporated. They were able to treat their wounded, consolidate their position, and prepare for the extraction that was now possible. A second helicopter, this one a Black Hawk, was able to slip into the valley, its flight path now relatively safe, and pull the battered but alive unit from the rocks. As the Black Hawk lifted off, the Ranger squad leader looked up at the distant, sun-drenched peak of Papa 3-1. He knew, with absolute certainty, that the person up there, the shooter, had saved every single one of his men. Back at the FOB hours later, the mood was subdued but celebratory. The after-action reports were being filed. The incredible nature of the shot was already spreading through the base like wildfire. Jensen finally walked into the OPC, her face streaked with dirt and grime, her eyes rimmed with red from the wind and cold. She looked exhausted, a far cry from the coiled spring of energy that had left just hours before. She set her heavy rifle case down and looked at Miller. "Sir, my after-action report is ready. I have all my data logs and wind readings." Miller just stared at her for a second, then nodded. "At ease, Gunny, the report can wait." He glanced over at the corner of the room where Thorne, Hayes, and Kincaid were standing. Thorne stepped forward. He walked up to Jensen and stopped. For a long, uncomfortable moment, he just looked at her. Then, he did something that no one in the room expected. He extended his hand. "Gunny," he said, his voice rough. "I was wrong. This morning I said a lot of things, dismissive things, and I was wrong. That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen. You saved those men. You saved them when none of us could." Jensen looked at his outstretched hand. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the hard-won respect. She took his hand. Her grip was firm, as strong as his own. "We all have our jobs, Chief," she said quietly. "Today, my job was to make a shot. Tomorrow, it might be yours. That's all it is." It wasn't a grand, sweeping forgiveness. It wasn't a moment of tearful reconciliation. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was the recognition of a fellow professional, a peer. Thorne had seen her not as a woman, not as an outsider, but as a shooter. And in that world, that was the highest compliment he could pay. He nodded, a single sharp dip of his chin. Copy that. He turned and walked away, but the wall was gone. The distrust had been shattered by the simple, irrefutable fact of her skill. The story of the shot, of the female sniper the SEALs didn't want, spread. It became a legend, a whispered testament to the fact that on a battlefield, courage and skill have no gender. For Sarah Jensen, it was just another day at work. But for the men she saved, and for the men who doubted her, it was a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. The shot from Papa 3-1 wasn't just a victory over an enemy, it was a victory over prejudice, a testament to the quiet, unshakable power of competence. And in the silent, frozen mountains, the legend of the ghost sniper of the Shoraback Valley was born.